10-20-30 by Arthur Ruhl. This is recorded to celebrate the 10th anniversary of LibriVox. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. 10-20-30 The theaters are closed for the summer, and the empty seats covered with chintz. Gone from one's morning paper our first night reviews. Gone are the lines of automobiles in the cross streets at night. Audience and critics have been turned out to grass. Everybody, in short, being out of town and the theatrical season quite over, I suddenly find myself, with various thousands of other non-existent persons, going busily to the theatre. There are plenty of us. We comfortably fill two of the largest theatres in town, the Old Academy of Music and the Old Grand Opera House, for 2 performances every day. In the last few weeks we have seen The Great Divide, Zaza, Trilby, The Man of the Hour, The Count of Monte Cristo, and Romeo and Juliet. There is a new play each week at each theatre, and some of them, Mr. Fitch's The City, for instance, were but yesterday appearing for the first time on Broadway. We see them decently played, as well as by the average second company on the road, not to speak of moving pictures and illustrated songs between the acts. And if it is Friday afternoon at Mr. Corse Peyton's theatre, pink tea with the company on the stage after the show. There is a peculiar, even an esoteric fascination about these entertainments, not residing entirely in the 30 cents one pays for a matinee orchestra seat. The loftiest need not be bored. Nowhere, perhaps, can one so measure a play's essential dramatic or at least theatrical spark. Gone is the feverish charm of the first night, gone that sense of escape, of warmth and security, lent to the playhouse by the mere bleakness of a winter night. The author's work is stripped of every factitious help, revealed in its bare unillumined bones. Imagine yourself, if you please, in the musty cavern of the Old Academy or the Grand Opera House on a hot July afternoon. Trolley cars are banging away outside, the blue sky calling one to the country. From the open balcony doors above, the hard, disillusioning sunlight comes streaming in. You can hear the sparrows twittering up there. All about is an audience, quaintly remote from those before whom the play was originally tried. Fat women in wilted shirtwaists, flippant girls chewing gum. Boys and men who, one vaguely feels, ought to be at work somewhere. Boys drone up and down the aisles, "Fresh candies, chocolates," and so on. An odor of spearmint floats in an atmosphere already redolent of talcum powder and stale perfume. The sunshine, falling from a balcony window, strikes the back hair of the woman in front of you, and reveals, scantily enmeshed therein, an unmatching and unmatchable rat. The lady on her right, lifting an arm in friendly fashion, adjusts the side nearest her. The lady on the left, from her side, offers a similar friendly service. Neither succeeds, and finally all 3 dismiss the matter as unimportant. It's only a bargain matinee. We're all friends. What's the difference, anyhow? The orchestra saws off its overture. Upstairs an usher tardily shuts the fire-escape doors and removes most of the sunlight. You fold up your afternoon paper, and, with a mind full of Mexican news, view the rising curtain. Into this hostile, or at least inert and wholly indifferent atmosphere, at the hands of players whose skill or awkwardness will receive no word of praise or blame in tomorrow's papers, who played Shakespeare last week, perhaps, and will play Mrs. Eleanor Glynn next, as part of the day's hard work, is projected a fabric of dramatic art about which the whole town was talking 6 months or perhaps a generation ago. Critics have sifted it, actors and author had their moment of fame. Thousands of people, gone now, goodness knows where, have laughed and cried over it, been lifted out of themselves, to go home and think about it for days. And here it is, coming over the footlights into the banal peppermint-scented twilight of the summer afternoon. It is a terrific strain to put a play to a strain which breaks down everything except that built to breathe the special and peculiar atmosphere of the theatre. Even though the matter be absurd, it must at least be to the manner born. No atmospheric stage manager here to beguile the drifting eye, no fondly applauded star. There must be a situation, or what appears to be one, two wills clashing together, words that lead and parry, words with a punch behind them if they are to get across. I have wondered if a course at the 10-20-30 plays might not be an excellent experience for young playwrights better acquainted with literature than with the special needs of the theatre. Listen, for instance, in The Man of the Hour, to the young reform mayor and the boss who nominated him and thought that he could control him. The independent young man is busy in his office. The boss comes shouldering in. "I understand Phelan's been to see you," he growls, referring to the rival boss. "What for?" "Business." "Whose business?" "My business," and the young man goes on with his writing. Dialogue with bounce to it. Actor-proof, as they say. An important franchise is under consideration. The mayor intends to veto it. The boss intends to jam it through. He shows that persons friendly to the young man are behind the bill. "That's no news," mutters the mayor. "Well, then," bellows the boss, "maybe this is." The fortune of the girl to whom the mayor is engaged, and of her brother, is invested in the stock, which may go to smash if the bill is vetoed. The young man starts back aghast. "Now veto it, if you will, and be damned to you," thunders the boss. The young mayor seizes his pen and writes. "What have you done?" sneers the boss. "Did you veto it?" "I vetoed it, and be damned to you," cries the young mayor, and down goes the curtain. If the value of robustness and resilience stands out more clearly in an unelaborate performance of this sort, so too do tricks and artifices. Observe the grey-haired old doorkeeper toddle in, and disclose the fact that he served in the Civil War under the young mayor's father. "So you served under my father," says the young man. "Do you remember him?" "Ah, it is coming." "As if it were yesterday," quavers the dear old doorkeeper. Slow music begins, and it doesn't take a clairvoyant to know that handkerchiefs will be out in a minute, the young mayor even more popular with the audience than he is now, and that no matter what the gentleman who plays the doorkeeper may do, he will bow himself respectfully out, convincing 90 people in every 100 in front that he is a magnificent character actor. The mechanical precision with which an audience reacts here, whenever the hero strikes an attitude and roars, would be continually astonishing, did one not recall that people go to the theatre not only to be charmed and to forget, but to play a familiar game according to certain conventional rules. They are like people listening to an after-dinner speaker. When the latter, bowing and smiling, describes his delight at addressing so handsome, so cultured, so brilliant an audience, nobody is deceived into thinking that he is any more dazzling than before, but he promptly applauds wildly and cries, "Yea, yea, yea," because that is what he is supposed to do. That is what is done. And people get an amusement out of such things. Some such partnership on the part of the audience must assist in preserving such relics as the familiar "world is mine" scene in the Count of Monte Cristo. You will recall the underground dungeon, through whose momentarily transparent walls we see Edmond Dantes and the Abbé Faria, prisoners both for 18 long years, with long white manes and white beards down to their waists. Tunneling to escape, they overhear the sentry talking overhead, and realize that their plot is discovered. It is too much for the old abbé, and feeling that he is about to expire, he confides to Edmund the secret of the buried treasure, and the entirely impossible scheme of escape that follows. It is the custom to dispose of those who die in this prison by tying them up in sacks, fastening a rock to their feet, and casting them into the sea. After the abbé is dead, Edmund shall drag the body into his own cell, take the abbé's place, and let himself be sunk in the ocean. Once there, he will cut his way out with a knife the abbé has kept conveniently hid, and swim away. And although melodramatic conventions demand that the poor old prisoners be represented as so frail and doddering that they can scarce drag themselves about their dungeon, and the feat is one which only an acrobat in the pink of condition would think of attempting, you have but to turn down the lights, turn on the thunder and lightning, shake up the canvas waves, and have Dantes, restored by his salt-water dip to a robust leading man, climb up on his rock and bellow, "The world is mine," to explode the whole house in a torrent of genuine applause. Where mere dynamics are so important, finer things are naturally lost or not attempted. By finer, of course, one means those requiring a certain intellectual sophistication, both for purposes of interpretation and of understanding. You can play Romeo and Juliet to a 10, 20, 30 audience, because its story has been lived by every one of them, according to his or her own experience, and it is the one thing in which most of them are probably most keenly interested. And indeed I have seen a Romeo at the Academy of Music whose performance was truer to Elizabethan feeling, and to me more entertaining, than the pale and drooping staginess of the more scholarly Mr. Southern. This Romeo was a trifle smiley and saccharine, perhaps, but he fairly exuded youthful warmth and good feeling. He would put his hands on his friends' shoulders when Mercutio and Benvolio urged him, "Nay, gentle Romeo, we must have you dance," and, laughing, say, "Not I, believe me, you have dancing shoes with nimble soles. I have a soul of lead, so stakes me to the ground I cannot move," and do this with a jolly, graceful languor, proud of himself and a little amused at himself. Between the acts, I asked one of the ushers who it was who was playing Romeo, as I saw it was not the regular leading man whose name was on the programme. "Who?" he demanded. "Why, that's the only man within 200 miles of New York who can play Romeo or Hamlet or anything else at 24 hours' notice. That's James Young, and he's what his name implies." "You mean he is young?" I said. "Well," said the usher, "he's only got 2 or 3 grey hairs in his head at that, and believe me, he's some actor." You can play Shakespeare, but not so easily Mr. J. M. Barrie, although Corse Peyton announces Peter Pan, and still less easily, I should say, intellectual farce or Maeterlinck or the comedy of manners in which so much depends on finely finished little things. You get the melodrama of Ruth Jordan's capture in the first act of The Great Divide, for instance, but the exultation into which the new country had lifted the prim New Englander, the vivid desire for life which was in a way a sort of subconscious urging of her action, is scarcely brought out. Generally speaking, of course, the leading lady doesn't want to waste her strength on that sort of thing. She has a delightfully cagey way of playing in a sort of emotional undertone, until the curtain or some other necessary climax pulls out all the stops. And little wonder. She gets up every morning at 8 o'clock, we will say, as regularly as any office slave. At 10 she is in the theatre rehearsing next week's play, out for a bite of lunch, or perhaps a sandwich in her dressing-room, and then the matinee begins. Then, on Fridays, if it is in the Peyton theatres, she must jump out of her costume directly the last curtain falls, and into her street clothes, and by the time the simple-minded herd out front have climbed onto the stage, be standing behind a refreshment table, dispensing ladies' fingers and pink lemonade. Then dinner and the evening performance. Lines, lines, lines to be learned, and a working day that lasts from 10 in the morning until 11 at night. The orchestra plays a few bars from a popular waltz when she enters for the first time. She is always greeted by applause then, and often at each entrance, and the audience thoroughly approve of everything she does. Perhaps it is because of this that she plays with an air of almost conscious virtue and benevolence, as if the rest of the cast were creatures of a lower world, and only she and the audience really understood. She almost always has a contralto voice, which, when she wants to, she can drop to delightfully thrilling and theatrical depths. Your appetite becomes so whetted by her standoffishness that you are ravished with delight when these moments come. I recall Miss Minna Phillips in The Count of Monte Cristo. She was playing Mercedes, who married the wicked Fernand after Edmund, her sailor lover, went to prison. How sad and beautiful she looked in her white wig after those 18 years of cruel separation. "I will kill him," hissed Edmund, referring to the sprightly young Albert, now nearly 18. "No, you will not," said Madame Fernand, and from the drop of her voice we knew that something was coming. "You will not even fight him. Because—" "And why?" demanded Edmund. "Because he is your son." It was just after the pink tea and Trilby were over, and before she dashed out to get a little dinner in return for the evening's performance, that I managed to lasso Miss Phillips for a moment's talk. They still have a sort of green room in the old Grand Opera House, and we sat there. Miss Phillips wore a dashing white tailored hat. She looked very healthy and cheerful, and I was impressed by the fact that she was many times more bright and animated off than on the stage. Yes, she admitted briskly, it certainly was a busy life, but she liked it. Better than the road, and better than freelancing, so to speak, on Broadway. Perhaps I knew that she came from Australia and had been featured in several road productions before joining the stock company 4 years ago. She could make more money in stock than she could out of it. It wasn't so bad when you got into the routine, and the great thing, of course, was being in New York all year round, practically, and having a home. Of course, one thing that helped her was that she was such a good study. She could pick up a role in no time. They got along beautifully together, like a happy family. Goodness gracious, wouldn't they have to? 12 performances a week, and morning rehearsals. If they didn't get along, they'd scratch out each other's eyes. And no sweethearting, either. Everybody minded his own business. Of course, you didn't have a hard role every week. Last week she was playing Zsa, and this week Trilby, and there was plenty to do in both of them. But next week, in The Count of Monte Cristo, she would almost have a rest. As I said good-bye to the leading lady, I found myself shaking hands with Mr. Joseph W. Girard, the company's heavy. Mr. Girard is a tall, well-built gentleman, with a pleasant expression and a fighting jaw. You would take him on the street for a successful cattleman or contractor rather than an actor. No turned-back cuffs or amethyst sleeve links or handkerchief up his sleeve for Mr. Girard. No pink teas either. "Not for me," he said grimly. Mr. Girard had just taken off the long Dundrearies which Taffy wears in Trilby. He was one of the Trois Anglaises, as they were called, in a French which added still another variety to the 3 kinds generally supposed to be extant, French, American, and West Point. I had seen Mr. Girard as the decadent old Duc de Brissac in Zsa, as the villain in The Still Alarm, and later I encountered him again as the bare-throated sailor Danglars in The Count of Monte Cristo, and as the wicked King of Sardalia in 3 Weeks, with a Russian beard, medals, a red nose, and high shiny boots. One of the fascinations of stock company acting is the chance it gives you to follow your friends through all sorts of character changes. I asked Mr. Girard how many roles he knew. He smiled deprecatingly down at his cigar. "Oh, I don't know," he said. "Maybe about 100. Somebody here reminded the heavy of the time he was on the road with a company that had a repertory of 18 plays. "Yes," assented Mr. Girard. "Put on any of 'em on a day's notice. They'd go ahead and bill us, and we'd give 'em whatever they liked. The Heavy preferred stock, too. He liked having a home. And as for hard work, why, look at those poor girls in burlesque shows. 2 shows a day, and that is hard work. Letting people choose their own plays is one of the devices of the 10-20-30 houses. At the Academy of Music, where a stock company has been playing steadily since last August, they send out some 8,000 circulars a week, merely to give their patrons a general notion of the next week's play. Often the audience chooses the plays to be put on, and subscribers have the same seats for 1 evening a week throughout the winter. Mr. Gerard told how the spectators in Brooklyn nodded to each other as they took their seats, and how you soon got to remember the faces out in front. And you couldn't fool the audience about the people on the stage. Send one of their favorites on, in a pitch-dark scene, as a detective or a burglar, and they'd recognize him, no matter what his disguise, and give him a hand. He didn't think much of Trilby for their sort of people. Too much Svengali, hypnotism, and evil eye business. It got on the women's nerves. All right for Broadway, maybe, but not for a family theatre. Mr. Corse Peyton has done more than anyone else, probably, to make the 10, 20, and 30-cent theatre a family institution. He has been at it 10 years now, and has 4 companies and something like 100 players working for him. A Friday matinee, such as I have mentioned, is a veritable orgy of the sort of thing that such an audience genuinely likes. The pink tea is one of Mr. Peyton's great ideas. A big sign in the lobby announces it as the crowd comes in. Corse himself issues another invitation from the stage just before the last act, and as soon as the curtain falls the crowd pile up on the stage by way of the left-hand boxes, fat ladies in shirt-waists pounding the scenery to see how real it is, giggling young girls, half awed, half contemptuous, in this behind-the-scenes world. The flip young ushers, returned to their street clothes, keep the crowd moving past the refreshment table and toward the stage door, murmuring sotto voce witticisms like, "Come and shake hands with your favorite actor," or "No, I don't like to eat watermelons, they get your ears so wet." Then there is an orchestra, and between the acts moving pictures if you are at the Academy. If you are at the Grand Opera House, a versatile young man, who shifts scenery or something at other times, comes out in front of the curtain and sings an illustrated song. There is a picture on the screen of a girl in a pink dress in a garden, and the athletic young tenor cries, "Let's make love among the roses, dearie, you and I, stealing little hugs and tender kisses on the sly." After the chorus has been sung once or twice, the words themselves are flashed on the curtain. The vague hum that has followed the song comes out more confidently on the spearmint-scented air. There is a sort of pathos in the sibilant S's in the twilight, and following the one young man's voice are many feminine voices, a little off-key perhaps, faltering, yet evidently in deadly earnest groping for the tune. With some difficulty I cornered the restless Mr. Peyton in his private office, and tried to engage him in talk. He is a tallish, slender man of 42 perhaps, with the look of feeling very chipper in spite of having been out late the night before. "If Mr. Peyton would open up," said his young business manager, gazing up at his chief with kindling eyes, "he could give you some great stuff." Mr. Peyton, however, was difficult to open up. His is the touch-and-go manner of speech, a line here and then off before the laugh comes. It is all right for an audience, but not adapted to close quarters. He was born, now don't laugh, in Centerville, Iowa. Coming down with a sort of stage fever, he started out with a circus, then organized a stock company and played his own neighborhood. "See that?" Mr. Peyton pointed to a framed photograph of an ingenious-looking youth in a long coat and top hat, reminding one slightly of a coachman. "What do you know about that? I suppose that was my idea of looking like an actor." The company succeeded, came East about a dozen years ago, and started in Brooklyn. Presently Mr. Peyton purchased a theatre there, and opened with The Girl I Left Behind Me. They played 41 weeks that year. Aristocracy, East Lynne, Jim the Penman, The Two Orphans, The Octoroon, Camille, Romeo and Juliet, Uncle Tom's Cabin, and The Little Minister among their varied repertory. "Look at this," suddenly volunteered Mr. Peyton, pointing to another framed photograph, this time of a curiously antique-looking automobile. On the front seat, at the almost vertical steering wheel, unmistakably sat Mr. Peyton himself, 10 years younger, more innocent-looking, with curly hair that stuck out from underneath his hat. "Yes," he admitted, "that's how I looked then. First automobile. Ought to 'a' seen the horses run when I came down the street. Now they'll come up and lick the gasoline off." Times have changed indeed. There are 4 coarse Peyton companies now, playing in the neighborhood of New York. Every morning in the lobby of the Grand Opera House there is a line of actors waiting, looking for a job. Mr. Peyton himself used to act, but he rarely does so now, except in his little monologues before the curtain. Of course he can't be in 4 places at once, but he manages to look in at each of his theatres every now and then to tell the audience how things are going. He suddenly shoots out in front of the curtain just before the last act, with a "Hello, audience," and swinging his arms, walks rapidly up and down the footlights, talking as he goes. Now and then he stops, whacks his head, or, elaborately twisting one hand round with the other, slaps his wrist, and continues his promenade. "Next week we'll revive that grand old melodrama, The Count of Monte Cristo. Splendid play, brings out the full strength of the company. After that, Mrs. Eleanor Glynn's 3 weeks. Beautiful scenic effects, good show, don't miss it. Prices same as usual, 10, 20, and 30 cents. $1.20 a dozen. 10 cents admission, 10 cents for 3 weeks. Cheaper than room rent." The audience adore it. They wish he would go on forever. "If there's anything you'd like, let us know. List of plays out in the lobby, 100 of 'em. Pick out the one you like best and tell us about it. That's what we're here for. Pretty soon we're going to put on a revival of the greatest melodrama ever written, The Two Orphans. Prices same as usual. 10 cents admission, 5 cents an orphan. Slap. And if there's any play you want, just vote for it. We'll play it. We play anything from Hamlet to Polo. Goodbye, people." And off he goes, swinging his arms. "I'll come back." Anything from Hamlet to Polo, with moving pictures and pink lemonade, and the glad news from the curtain advertisements that somebody's gum aids digestion and that your credit is good at Spinks. Of course the ingenue is rather too giggly, and the juvenile, in wiping out the lines of care, doth so incarnadine his face that his eyes are but 2 black spots like the lumps of coal in a snowman. The comic aunt overdoes her make-up by hanging a green parrot on the very rim of her bonnet, so that it flops up and down absurdly every time she moves her head. There are all sorts of exaggerations, over-accents, a continuous scaling down. You see the author's work through a glass darkly, perhaps, but you do see. For 30 cents, 50 in the evening, you see plays of established merit, while Broadway is paying $2 to see plays tried out. July 1911. End of 10/20/30 by Arthur Ruhl. Read by Maria Casper.